I'm Callista.
And I'm Teresa, and this is Terrifyingly Typical True Crime.
And continuing with our theme on religious leaders who kill family members, as with Arthur Burton Shermer, we're once again talking about a pastor who was having an affair with a female member of his congregation and chose to kill his inconvenient wife rather than get a sinful divorce. Today, we're talking about lascivious Matt Baker, his love of All American Rejects, and his long history of sexual assault and misconduct.
It was 12:01 a.m. on Saturday, April 8th, 2006, when 34-year-old Matt Baker called 911. The pastor from Crossroads Baptist Church in Lorena, Texas, told the dispatcher that he had just gotten back home to discover his 31-year-old wife, Kari, lying unconscious in the couple's bedroom. After saying, "I think my wife just committed suicide. Her lips are blue, hands are cold, and there's a note that says, 'I'm sorry.'" Basically, Matt was instructed to perform CPR until the emergency responders arrived. EMS providers and firefighters raced to Kari's side only minutes later, but their efforts were in vain. Kari was already gone. In the wake of his wife's sudden death, Matt told officers from the Hewitt Police Department that he had gone out around 11:11 that night to get gas and a movie to watch with Kari. Wow, not at all suspicious to say you left at around 11:11. Who says that? Wouldn't most people say I left a little after 11 or left around 11:15?
Let me tell you, I've rehearsed my story. Without telling you, I've rehearsed my story.
Too true. When he had let himself back in through the locked garage door around 45 minutes later, he found the door to his and Kari's bedroom was also locked. Knowing she was in there, he used a screwdriver to open the door. Panicked to have found his naked wife in the fetal position without a pulse and not breathing, he called for help.
When emergency responders reported finding Kari wearing underwear and a t shirt, not naked as Matt had reported, Matt said that he had managed to dress Kari and move her from the bed to the floor to administer CPR while speaking to the dispatcher.
I understand the reaction to protect her modesty, but I think covering her with a sheet, which could still contaminate evidence, would have been better. Maybe he wanted to make sure his DNA was all over her, like, look at all the effort I went in to save her.
I think it's a very much an effort to make it look like he cared so much about his wife that he went to the effort of dressing her. Because the county didn't have its own medical examiner, police photographed the scene, then phoned a McLennan County Justice of the Peace. After telling him the evidence in front of them, which included a container of the sleep aid Unisom with only one pill left inside and two beside the bottle, all alongside a typed suicide note on the bedside table.
Only a murderer types a suicide note. A person who commits suicide is most likely going to handwrite a note, in my opinion.
Oh, don't worry, we're going to get into that. The Justice of the Peace waived the autopsy and ruled Carrie's manner of death a suicide. This decision was made over the phone by a Justice of the Peace who never visited the scene and instead went back to sleep after the call. With this rapid ruling, all authorities did to preserve the scene at the time was collect the unisom and note, while a single detective took a few photographs.
Oh my God, talk about dialing it in, literally. Isn't a suicide considered a suspicious death and should be investigated?
It sure should be. And in what will come as a surprise to no one, Carrie Baker had not died by suicide. But to get to the end of the winding road that eventually ended in a murder conviction, let's go back to where it all began.
Born in Kerrville, Texas in 1971 to Barbara and Oscar Baker, Matt grew up with his older biological sister and foster siblings. His parents had moved into a bigger home when Matt was one, then turned it into a group home where they could raise other children in the community. Although this endeavor only lasted a couple of years, young Matt decided he wanted to follow in his parents' footsteps by using his faith to lead and help those around him. Having made his decision to become a minister, he went to Baylor University in Waco, Texas to study athletic training and church recreation. It was while attending Baylor that he met fellow student Kari Doolin. Jim and Linda Doolin welcomed baby Kari Lynn to their family on August 13th, 1974. She was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, and grew up in a similarly religious environment to Matt's in Waco with her brother Adam. It was fitting then that 20-year-old Kari met 23-year-old Matt in 1994 after running into each other at a day camp at First Baptist Church in Waco, where they were both counselors. To their delight, she kept telling her parents that Matt, a senior at Baylor University, was a really good Christian. Only 3 months after that first spark of attraction, they were married at Kari's parents' home. That is a really short engagement.
I guess there's the argument that when you know, you know.
Hmm.
As Matt finished his studies at Baylor's George W. Truett Theological Seminary to officially become a seminary educated minister, after also graduating from Baylor, Kari got her master's degree at Dallas Baptist University. When they moved to Hewitt and Matt became the pastor of Crossroads Baptist Church of Lorena, which is near Hewitt but more expensive, she supported him by becoming a member of her husband's church. Kari was happy being a third grade teacher at Spring Valley Elementary and an adjunct professor at Tarleton State University. And even happier being the mother of their girls, Kenzie, whom Kari became pregnant with less than a year after marrying Matt, and Cassidy, who came along 18 months later. But when Cassidy turned 1 in 1998, the young girl was found to have a cancerous brain tumor. Still, tragedy seemed to have been averted after she underwent an operation on the tumor. By late February 1999, Cassidy was even allowed to return to the Baker's parsonage following a 90-day hospital stint. However, the family's relieved sigh turned into a horrified scream when, right after midnight on March 22nd, nearly a month after her release, Matt went to check on Cassidy. He walked into her room and discovered that his daughter wasn't breathing. After yelling for Kari to call emergency services, Cassidy was rushed to the hospital. The doctors did all they could, but to no avail. Cassidy died when she was 16 months old, only 4 months after the tumor was found.
Fuck cancer, that is tragic.
Truly, fuck cancer, always.
As you would expect, the loss of her second daughter hit Kari hard. A bubbly young mom and elementary school teacher, Kari tried to go on in the best way she knew how. She started seeing a grief counselor and began writing about Cassidy in her personal Bible. Kari survived that first year and gave birth to the Baker's youngest daughter, Grace, in 2000. But nothing could stop the death of her child from changing her. Matt remembered that Kari was able to get through the day by dedicating herself to her work, but she became more reserved once she got home, the place where Cassidy should still be. Because of this shift, Matt said he was the girl's primary caregiver. He added that Kari started to need help sleeping after Cassidy's death and turned to the over-the-counter sleep aid Unisom. He also claimed that she would sometimes take prescription medication from friends and family members. He is really laying the groundwork for what is to come.
He sure is.
However, Kari's outlook would always darken further in the weeks leading up to the March anniversary of Cassidy's death, as she was forcefully reminded that she had another year in front of her without her daughter. And of course it did. I would think the anniversary would affect all family members.
Even if it was to a lesser extent, how could it not? Only days before she died, Matt drove Kari to a doctor after they had survived the 7-year anniversary of the death of their middle child. This doctor diagnosed his wife as having depression and sent her back home with a prescription for an antidepressant. Matt said Kari couldn't accept the diagnosis and came close to hyperventilating in the clinic's office. Her panic only escalated on their way back home, and Kari started to hyperventilate in earnest. As Matt was driving down the highway at 45 to 50 miles per hour, Kari tried to force her door open, desperate for air and space to breathe. Matt said that he held onto Kari's waistband to keep her in the car and from accidentally hurting herself until he could pull over.
Okay, that's some creative storytelling. If she did need air, she would have rolled down the window. Also, there was a shoulder on the highway. Wouldn't he have pulled over?
I mean, he said he eventually did. Maybe he had to wait for other cars to get out of the way before he could.
Sure, okay.
He claimed that this episode highlighted the anxiety Kari was diagnosed with before her death. These nerves never left her. On the day before she died, Friday, April 7th, 2006, Kari interviewed for a new teaching position at a junior high school.
Which is a normal thing to do before you plan to commit suicide.
And it wasn't even like a week earlier, it was the very day before. Matt said that Kari had been worried and felt unwell after the interview was over. Later, at one of their daughter's swim lessons in the early evening, Kari looked upset. Although she felt nauseous, both she and Matt had a wine cooler that night. Then, after the kids were tucked into bed, they thankfully would stay asleep for the entirety of the ordeal to come. At 10:30, Kari asked Matt to get gas in a movie. It was late, but Matt didn't argue. He dressed and headed out at 11:11. First, he drove to the gas station closest to their suburban home, which was around 2 miles away. After filling up, he went to the video store. Oh, the nostalgia.
I personally always liked Hollywood Video more than Blockbuster.
I can understand that. Once there, he rented a movie and came back home, kickstarting the series of events with which we started the episode.
With the suicide note referring to Cassidy and April 8th falling shortly after the anniversary of her daughter's death, it seemed like the grief that had been consuming Kari had, in fact, driven her to take her own life. Matt himself was quick to mention Kari's sorrow to authorities on the night she was found dead, along with telling them that she had been in counseling and apparently had started to mention suicide more frequently in the lead up to her death. In reality, Kari herself had repeatedly said she was not suicidal in the days before she supposedly took her own life. After Kari's time of death was called in the early morning of Saturday, April 8th, 2006, Linda and Jim Doolin, Kari's parents, went to her home. They were shocked by the news of Kari's suicide, but reluctantly accept the story presented to them. I suppose in their minds that was the easiest explanation. I mean, my instinct would be to question everything and demand an investigation, but okay.
I can see myself being so taken aback that I would just go along with it, at least for a time.
You would be numb. I mean, Matt capitalized on this acquiescence to demand that his wife's funeral be held that very Monday, only 2 days later. Not at all suspicious.
I know. However, in the days after her burial, Kari's family and acquaintances began to express their doubts that Kari would have taken her own life. Yes, she was devastated by Cassidy's death, but she had two other daughters, Kenzie and Grace, whom she loved dearly. And it was true that she was considering leaving her third grade teaching position at Spring Valley Elementary School. But when she went to interview for the job at the junior high school the day before she died, she told her aunt, Nancy Lanham, that far from being nervous, as Matt had claimed, she had a good feeling about her chances of getting the role. Her mother's younger sister also didn't remember anyone besides Matt saying that Kari felt sick. And if she had, why would she ask Matt to get them a movie so that they could stay up even later? Even if her family could believe that she had taken her own life while naked, knowing that was how she would be found, they couldn't get past the fact that Kari didn't even take Unisom. She bought a generic brand instead.
I love that they knew this.
Me too. Around the time that her family started to ask questions, a preacher also found a note in Kari's Bible dated April 2nd, 2006, less than a week before her death, in which she wrote, "I am not sure what is going on with Matt, but Lord, help me find peace with him."
Although some were giving the official version of events and the man pushing them a second glance, others had no doubts whatsoever. Matt's mother, Barbara, fully believed Kari died by suicide. She said, Suicide is an answer to pain you can't get rid of. There was pain that Kari was undergoing that she either couldn't or didn't get the proper help for, and that was not a bad answer for her. Really, what about her two daughters that she adored and would be unlikely to leave?
If something doesn't fit into the preferred narrative, our answer, of course, should be to just ignore it.
And if we don't believe it was suicide, that opens up way too many possibilities.
Hmm.
But things were coming out about Barbara's son that hardly proved he was a devoted husband or even a decent man. Over a week after Carrie's death, Nancy, along with Carrie's mom's other two sisters, Kay and Jennifer, and her niece Lindsay, came to Linda and gave her some upsetting news. They told her that Matt, who had been harping on about how depressed and suicidal Carrie had been, had come on to multiple young women while married to her daughter. He had even made creepy sexual comments to Kay's daughter while standing behind her. Carrie had never divulged the secrets in her marriage to her mother before. That wasn't to say she wasn't aware of Matt's behavior, though. She simply couldn't bring herself to believe what she found out about her husband. Carrie may have been unable to accept her husband's true character, but his base behavior was far from a secret. Julie Thurl was one of the many who knew to stay away from Matt. She had been a lifeguard at the YMCA of Central Texas, for which her mother was the CEO, when Matt was the then director of youth. She remembered her mother telling her to steer clear of Matt because he had a history of making women feel uncomfortable. Her mother would later fire Matt after multiple women came to her about him.
Matt made a habit of job hopping after either getting fired or being told off for his behavior. Like when he received a warning after several young women at a church youth center came forward. But this wasn't a habit that he developed later in life. Women had been coming forward about Matt Baker for years, even before he met Kari. In December 1991, he and Laura Muller, who is now a meteorologist for the National Weather Service in New York, were assistant athletic trainers. Once, while they were cleaning one of the locker rooms at Baylor University, Matt took advantage of the empty room to pick Laura up and sit her on his lap on one of the many benches scattered around. He then started to rub her thigh and crotch. Matt later said this assault was overblown.
Spoken like every man who has ever assaulted a woman.
God, women are so sensitive, aren't they? So hysterical. Matt claimed that he had simply given Laura a fright when he turned off the lights and never put a hand on her. Officials at the university to whom Laura reported the incident believed Matt's version of events and dismissed Laura's allegations.
This makes me want to scream. This is why women don't come forward. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center's research indicates that the rate of false reporting for sexual assault is in the range of 2 to 8%, which means all the other women are telling the truth.
Not to mention that many women don't report sexual assault, so if we included them, that statistic would be even lower.
That's right.
Having gotten away scot free after Laura came forward, Matt has, shockingly, never owned up to assaulting any of the women or girls who have spoken out. And we do have to say girls too, because in 1996, Carrie and Matt had been living in an apartment complex when Matt assaulted Deanne Avalos's 16-year-old daughter. After asking if she had ever been kissed before and learning that she had, Matt forcefully kissed, i.e., assaulted, the young girl.
What an absolute creep.
He's a complete slimeball.
Just as nothing happened after this assault, Matt faced charges of sexual misconduct numerous times soon after becoming a pastor. But his superiors chose to believe him, surprise, surprise, and didn't bother to give prospective employers a heads up about the claims of women they didn't think were credible. I mean, that's nice that they were able to ignore these claims and, with their all knowing ability to determine if women were credible or not. I mean, I assume the ones not credible were probably single and dressed provocatively.
Or maybe having a vagina is all it takes not to be credible.
That is some sad commentary.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a taste of what the pastor was getting up to throughout his holy career. When Matt was an intern at Waco's First Baptist Church, which was where he met Kari, a female janitor reported that he had manhandled her in a bathroom and said he wanted sex. However, since it was her word against his, church leaders did nothing. I mean, what were they expected to believe the female janitor over the male intern? I mean, come on.
Like, that's going to happen.
They didn't fire Matt or report the incident to the Baptist General Convention of Texas, but did Matt thank his lucky stars and learn from this close call? He most certainly did not. Matt went on to lose his job at another YMCA, this time the Waco Family YMCA, in January 1996, after a female counselor said he had groped her. If you are never reprimanded for your vile behavior, why would you stop?
Exactly. If you enjoy something, and I'm sure Matt got off on assaulting women, and if you've never faced any consequences for it, what's motivating you to act differently?
With no one outside the organization the wiser, Matt left relatively unscathed. In the fall of that year, he started at Baylor's George W. Truett Theological Seminary, where he accepted the first of his 5 eventual positions as a pastor. The last of these positions would be at Crossroads Baptist Church, from which he was only let go after his role in Kari's suicide became apparent in 2006.
If his superiors weren't ready to hold Matt to account, Kari certainly couldn't allow herself to believe the allegations against her husband.
After all, she told her parents what a good Christian man he was.
And that's part of what drew her to him. If that's proven to be false, their life together falls apart. Having previously only mentioned to her mother Linda that a few women had lied about Matt in the 90s,
Because that is what he told her.
mm, Linda was understandably floored when her sisters and niece relayed Matt's well known habit of coming on to young women while married to her daughter. Still, she put aside her shock and decided that, no matter what, she would find out what really happened to Kari. And she didn't have to do it alone. Linda, her sisters, and her niece banded together under the name Charlie's Angels and tried to piece together what actually happened in the lead up to Kari's death.
Go them.
Too right. In a stroke of good luck, the Doolins had previously added Kari's and Matt's cell phones to their plan. This meant that Linda was able to easily get a hold of their phone records and discover that in only a few weeks, both before and after Kari's death, Matt's phone had called Kari's phone almost 180 times, sometimes up to 17 times in a single day. If you also can't imagine calling anyone 17 times in one day, let alone someone you live with, you won't be shocked to learn that Matt wasn't actually calling Kari. Oh, he was calling her phone all right, but that phone was still being used and used often 10 days after her death.
It turned out that the week after his wife died, Matt had given Kari's phone to a newly divorced mother from his church named Vanessa Bowles. For real, did he forget that he was on his in law's phone plan? Who gives their dead wife's phone to someone?
It's not great optics, to say the least.
Yeah. Vanessa's father also happened to be the music minister at the same church Matt worked at, and Matt said he had given Kari's phone to her as he counseled her through the end of her marriage and the start of her new life as a single mom. If all he was doing was counseling her, though, he was truly going above and beyond because in 10 days, Matt and Vanessa had spent nearly, wait for it, 1,700 minutes on the phone together, in spite of this ridiculous amount of contact. Matt claimed they were just friends, something he desperately needed after Kari's death. And that is over 2.5 hours per day.
Thanks for the math.
I mean, I had to check.
Fair enough.
Despite Matt only confessing to wanting to date Vanessa months after Kari's death, his daughters, Kenzie and Grace, told Kari's parents that Matt had already cleared the family home of Kari's clothes and photographs and put up pictures of Kenzie and Grace with Vanessa. and her kid instead, even explicitly saying it was time for his daughters to have a new mother. He's such a despicable human being.
He really is.
He did all this within 2 weeks of Kari's death, and at the end of that time period, Vanessa attended Kenzie's 10th birthday party. While Vanessa wouldn't say where she stayed or what happened that night, she did admit to sleeping over, and I'm sure it was on the couch.
Oh, I'm sure.
Armed with this suspicious call history and his daughter's troubling accounts, Kari's parents hired former Assistant U.S. Attorney Bill Johnston to look more closely at Kari's death. Bill then recruited former Department of Public Safety undercover agent John Bennett, former Deputy U.S. Marshal Mike McNamara, and Texas Ranger Matt Cathan. The statewide law enforcement officers that make up the Texas Rangers wouldn't be officially investigating, but Matt Cathan agreed to come on board on his own.
Unconvinced by Matt's willingness to talk to the Hewitt police in the months after his wife's death and his past polygraph test, because that means nothing, the team started with several questions, such as if someone who planned to kill themselves with sleeping pills would leave one pill inside the bottle and two more beside it, instead of taking every single one in their possession just to be sure. The photographs of Kari's body also raised some eyebrows, because a small scrape on her nose was noticeable and the color around her nose and lips was off, which could signify suffocation with an object with coarse fibers that might have rubbed her nose. They, like you, also gave the typed suicide note some side eye. The note, which contains grammatical errors that were uncharacteristic for the recently deceased teacher, read, Matt, I am so sorry. I am so tired. I just want to sleep for a while. Please forgive me. Tell Kenzie and Grace that I love them very much. Tell my mom and dad that I love them too. I love you, Matt. I am sorry for the past few weeks. I want to give Cassidy a hug. I need to feel her again. Please continue to be the great dad to our little girls. Love them every day for me. I am sorry. I love you, Kari. I will say, though, that I came across some sources that said it was suspicious that Kari blamed herself and spoke of Matt being a good father. But if you felt that suicide was your only option, and that meant leaving behind your children to escape your unimaginable pain, you'd hardly relish the thought of leaving them in the care of a substandard parent. Also, if we're assuming she was depressed, as you would be after the death of your child, I don't think it's surprising at all that she's blaming herself. She feels incorrectly, like she's at fault. I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that I think she killed herself or wrote this note, but I thought I should address those points. More tellingly, in my opinion, were the two ink pens on the bedside table beside the suicide note. Because if Kari was the author and had impersonally typed out her final words, wouldn't she use one of the pens to at least sign it by hand?
I mean, I agree. Obviously, if she was the author of the suicide note and Matt was actually this incredible person and amazing parent, you would say that. However, the pompous prick that he is had to throw some shade at Carrie and then prop himself up as a good dad.
Yeah, he's taking every opportunity to turn Kari into the bad guy and himself into the good guy.
Definitely. Bill Johnson's team decided to dig deeper than the immediate circumstances and unearthed Matt's exploits both before and throughout his marriage. It seemed that preying upon any young woman in his orbit hadn't satisfied his lecherous ways, so he spent hours on porn sites to fulfill his fantasies. However, this internet history was far less concerning than the searches he had done on overdose by sleeping pills or the visits he made to pharmaceutical websites where he could buy drugs like Ambien, a medication for insomnia, without a prescription. With the evidence the team had discovered, the Doolins brought a wrongful death lawsuit against Matt in July 2006. Again, you have to love a dumb criminal. Are most people just not aware that police departments have forensic investigators that are able to access your searches and what websites you have spent time on?
It was the 2000s, so maybe less so then.
Maybe. Previously unmoved to hear Kari's parents' pleas to give the case more than a cursory glance, only weeks after they filed the wrongful death lawsuit, Justice of the Peace Billy Martin looked over the new findings and reopened his earlier ruling that Kari Baker had died by suicide. I do wonder if this was just a CYA move, realizing there would be more scrutiny regarding the case because of their lawsuit and the initial lack of investigation.
I could believe it.
Also, apparently in small Texas towns like Hewitt, which is a suburb of the much larger Waco, it isn't uncommon for a justice of the peace to be the one to rule on the manner of death. Whether it's typical for them not to bother to visit the scene of a possible crime is unclear. And that is crazy to me. I understand that it is a small town, but why wouldn't they have a coroner or someone with more experience at least properly investigate the crime scene?
It does seem odd. Following the reopened ruling, Carrie's body was exhumed, and the Southwest Institute of Forensic Sciences in Dallas conducted the postmortem that was waived after her death. But by this point, the body had been embalmed and buried for around 3 months. No pills were found in her stomach contents, and a blood test couldn't be conducted, so her muscular tissue was analyzed instead. The results came back in September 2006, but they reflected the little the pathologist could find, such as that some amount of alcohol, as well as the sleep aids Unisom and the generic version of Ambien, which Kari didn't have a prescription for, were in her system. A third unidentified drug was also found. However, because they were unable to establish how much of the drug she had ingested or when they entered her system, the pathologist classified her death as undetermined. This was at least a step in the right direction away from a presumed suicide. Carrie's family also obtained the services of a toxicology expert to find more to use in the wrongful death lawsuit. This toxicologist from Tennessee determined that the lack of pills in Carrie's stomach meant that she hadn't overdosed or died during the 45 to 50 minutes Matt said he was out of the house.
The Doolins had been gathering evidence piece by piece to prove that Matt was lying, and after they kept pushing for an inquest based on all that they had learned, the Justice of the Peace finally held one over a year after Carrie's death in August 2007. Matt didn't testify, but after considering the statements of the police officers, pathologists, toxicologists, and Carrie's family, Billy Martin followed the pathologist's lead in changing his ruling from 18 months earlier from suicide to undetermined. Only a month after the inquest, the community in the largely Baptist town of Hewitt, Texas, that had rallied around their widowed pastor was shocked when Matt was arrested on September 21st, 2007. However, he was released after 25 days when an indictment couldn't be secured with the inconclusive evidence the authorities had. After Matt posted bond, he left his problems nearly 160 miles away to return to live among his supporters in Kerrville, Texas. His longtime friends couldn't believe Matt had killed Kari. They didn't think the man now living with his parents and daughters in his childhood home was capable of it, which is not at all surprising. Family and friends rarely believe someone so close to them is guilty of something so heinous.
Which makes sense, believing that would hardly make you feel better. Carrie's best friend, Jill Hotz, would have once agreed with them. Now, she knew better. She was sure Carrie hadn't killed herself and had become suspicious of Matt after speaking to Carrie in the days leading up to her death. On the ominous call, Carrie had sobbed over the phone as she told Jill that Matt was having an affair. Jill had come to regret her attempt to convince Carrie that her husband loved her and would never cheat on her. But Carrie's concern about her husband's fidelity hadn't been the main reason for her distress. She had told Jill that Matt had said she had caused Cassidy's death. He claimed that while he was praying for Cassidy to have a chance to grow old, Kari was praying for their daughter's suffering to end. Matt believed God had listened to Kari instead of him. He would later say that Kari had misunderstood him when he was voicing his pain, that his prayer had gone unanswered while hers hadn't. However, the email he sent his wife days prior to her phone call with Jill told a very different story. The email read, "I know, deep down, I hold a grudge against God and you for him answering your prayer and not mine. In some ways, I do hold you to blame for her death."
Wow. Could praying for her suffering to end not mean that she prayed for her to get better?
Yeah, I don't buy that Carrie was praying for her daughter to die and that only Matt wanted her to live,
I mean, Carrie can't say anything because she's dead, so he can say whatever the hell he wants, I guess.
which is super convenient for him.
Super. The day after her call to Jill, Carrie told her grief counselor, the same one she had been seeing since her daughter's death, that she believed Matt was cheating on her and attempting to kill her. 3 days later, she was found dead. Unable to ignore the coincidence, her grief counselor went up to Matt at the visitation before Carrie's funeral. I mean, maybe she should have gone to Carrie's family. I don't know how she thought Matt was going to react.
I applaud her nerve, though.
That's true. In addition to denying cheating on Carrie and wanting her dead, Matt suspiciously and idiotically asked asked her grief counselor if Carrie had ever mentioned him attempting to murder her. Luckily for him, though, right before she died, Carrie went back on her earlier statements to say that she didn't think her husband wanted to hurt her. Carrie had redevoted herself to their marriage just in time for Matt not to look like the prime suspect, telling Jill the day before she was found that she and Matt were working things out. But the reprieve his late wife had brought him wouldn't last forever.
Back in Waco, the prosecutors on the case, Assistant District Attorney Crawford Long,
Gotta love a southern name.
too true, and Susan Schaefer had a wealth of experience to call upon in finding enough evidence to convince a jury of Matt's guilt. But in Crawford Long's nearly 3 decades, he had seen few cases as highly publicized as this one. It featured in an article in Texas Monthly Magazine, episodes of the news shows 48 Hours in 2020, and newspapers all over the country. Both the lawyer for the Dulins and Matt himself were interviewed for the TV coverage. With Matt also gracing the cover of Texas Monthly, he seemed to be soaking up the attention his wife's murder had garnered. He even, disgustingly, said on 48 Hours about Carrie, "I know if she were sitting here, she would look at you and say, 'He didn't do anything. Leave him alone.' But she can't. It's so improbable. It's not who I am. I loved my wife. I never hurt her a day in my life."
Aren't attorneys supposed to tell you not to talk to the media?
Maybe they don't feel like they have a choice when everyone already has an opinion. The prosecution, like Matt, knew how important it was to get the media on their side, which they managed to do by catchily dubbing Matt Baker the murdering minister.
Their media skills aside, Matt wasn't alone in fighting for his freedom. Former prosecutor turned pro bono defense attorney for Matt, Guy James Gray, provided alternative explanations for what investigators had found thus far. To counter the note in Carrie's Bible that she wrote days before her death that said she didn't know what was going on with her husband, he pointed to the notes she had made about Cassidy besides biblical passages that seemed to indicate suicide. Next to one passage about how wonderful heaven was, Carrie had written, "I want to go to Cassidy." As for the small scrape on her nose that Bill Johnston believed was caused by an object like a pillow with coarse fibers being used to suffocate her, Guy claimed that it could have come from equipment used by the emergency responders as they tried to revive Carrie. While preparing to go up against Guy James Gray in court, the prosecution ran into a number of obstacles. The first was the timeline. Matt had said that he went to rent a movie at 11:11 p.m. His credit card was then used at the video store at 11:50 p.m. and he called 911 at 12:01 a.m. While medical experts thought that it was improbable that Kari had taken the pills and died within that 45 to 50-minute time span, it's not as if sleeping pills kick in immediately. They didn't think it was inconceivable that she had taken the 29 sleeping pills estimated to be in her possession and died in less than an hour. Beyond that, the embalming process made it difficult to definitively say if she had even died of an overdose because they couldn't run a blood test.
The second obstacle was the pooling of blood or lividity in Carrie's body. Lividity can occur between 20 minutes to 2 hours after someone has died and can help determine the time of death. Lividity did appear in the photographs of Carrie's body taken around 12:30 the morning she died, but they were taken from too far away for experts to pinpoint her time of death, even though Bill Johnston thought the pooling showed she had been dead for longer than Matt's timeline allowed. More tellingly than the possible holes the photographs were poking in Matt's timeline was their inconsistency with the position in which Matt said he found Carrie. Matt had even drawn a diagram of the way he had discovered Carrie, on her back, at a slight angle on the bed, with her arms stretched out beside her. However, her blood had pooled unevenly in her arms. Because blood will sink to the lowest point in the body, Carrie's left arm must have been lower to account for there being more lividity. This meant that her left arm must have been hanging off the bed, which is completely contrary to what Matt claimed.
Even if lividity couldn't prove Matt was lying about the timeline, her body temperature painted a clearer picture. Toxicologist Stephen Karch couldn't buy that Kari had turned cold, as was noted by a paramedic as well as Matt, within the 45 to 50-minute time span during which Matt had been gone. Stephen Karch said the only way a body would go cold within an hour is if the person were killed in the Arctic or in an icebox. Still, with the evidence the other medical professionals were presented with, even he would have classified the death as undetermined. With the forensic evidence throwing up as many problems as solutions, the prosecution turned their attention to Matt's affair with Vanessa Bowles, the woman in possession of Kari's phone who had previously told authorities that she knew nothing of Kari's death and had never been involved with Matt. Investigator Abden Rodriguez was tasked with interviewing Vanessa and her lawyer, Bruce Burleson, to find out the truth. However, when he questioned her on January 27, 2009, she maintained what she had previously said in August 2006.
Since Vanessa was sticking to her unlikely story, the prosecution subpoenaed her. Her lawyer informed the prosecution that Vanessa would mainly be pleading the fifth, but she had a bit of new information to give. After Judge Matt Johnson of the 54th District Court gave her use or testimonial immunity, which protected Vanessa from her testimony being used against her, she was questioned in front of a grand jury on March 25th, 2009. The prosecution had the cell phone records that showed she and Matt had been together around a week after Kari died. She might have been able to use Matt's line of them being friends for that, but she would have a harder time explaining the next bit of evidence. Because only a few weeks after Kari's death, Matt and Vanessa, with Kenzie and Grace in tow, were seen shopping for engagement rings by a jewelry store employee. But Vanessa wasn't caving that easily. When asked about the calls and the shopping trip, Vanessa didn't deny that they had happened. But she did deny having a romantic relationship with Matt. While Matt claimed they had actually been looking for earrings for one of the girls, Vanessa would later say Matt had told her that his daughters had been eager to pick out her engagement rings, weeks after losing their mother.
It's like he wanted to wipe the memory of their mother away.
It's exactly like that. I mean, he's moved on from Kari. Why can't their kids do the same? Even before she came clean, though, Vanessa didn't completely stonewall the prosecution. Near the end of her testimony before the grand jury, Vanessa dropped a bombshell. When Crawford Long asked if Matt had ever said anything about Kari's death, she replied, "Yes." He said, "I killed her for you." She detonated a second explosive when she revealed that Matt had even confessed to smothering Kari.
And then she went looking for engagement rings with him instead of running quickly away.
It's true, but to be fair, we'll get into her reasoning for that later.
Following a discussion with the criminal district attorney, the prosecution handed the murder indictment against Matt Baker to the grand jury later the same day. Prosecutors may have had to refund Matt's bond after failing to indict him within 6 months of his arrest in September 2007, around a year and a half earlier. But many months of hard work had finally given them the evidence they needed to try him in court. Matt was rearrested nearly 3 years after Kari's murder and held on a $500,000 bail. Still, the prosecution needed more, and they knew Vanessa hadn't told them everything. So investigator Rodriguez went back to interview her again on March 31st, 2009. Throughout the recorded section of the interview, Vanessa stuck to her narrative. But after the tape recorder was put away, Vanessa asked Rodriguez if he bought her version of events. He told her he believed she was holding something back. As opposed to denying it, Vanessa confessed that while his wife and daughters were at school, she and Matt had had sex once in his and Kari's bed before Kari died. This was a major shift in the timeline and one that could finally point to a clear motive, since Vanessa had previously admitted that she had started dating Matt, but only after Kari had died.
With this hard-won tidbit, the prosecution thought Vanessa might be ready to talk, so they set up another interview, this time to be held after hours. When investigators Abden Rodriguez and Montea Stewart and prosecutor Susan Schaefer spoke with Vanessa and her new lawyer, Russ Hunt, on September 2nd, 2009, she confessed to lying earlier before finally recounting the entirety of her affair with Matt and the lurid details he had told her about his wife's death. During the 4-hour interview, she gave them the whole sordid story. It began when she and Matt had met at Crossroads Baptist Church in the fall of 2005. She had been sitting alone, and Matt came to sit beside her. He started a conversation and told the newly single mom, "Whoever finds you is going to be a lucky man." He used the proximity he had gained counseling her about her divorce to go from quoting scripture to making sexual advances.
I mean, it's such a natural progression.
Obviously. He built a rapport with her by recounting how he and Kari had lost custody, his experience counseling other divorcees, and his faith that God could help a person recover from anything. His advances became more aggressive, and by the middle of December, he was saying cringy things like, "Don't date that guy, only date your preacher." He told her he had had previous affairs that Kari had never found out about. I get that shows he hasn't been caught, but I'm not really sure that's a point in his favor.
I always wonder why women or men will start a relationship with someone who admits they have cheated on their spouse repeatedly. Do you really think you are that special that that behavior won't continue with you?
I don't buy into the once a cheater, always a cheater line of thinking, but I think if someone doesn't show any remorse for hurting the other person, that's a good indicator they'll hurt you too.
Exactly.
Matt also assured Vanessa that he was sterile and STD free, and to really make himself out to be a kind hearted, hard done by stud, he cast aspersions on his wife. He said Kari was lazy, depressed, and wouldn't have sex with him anymore. He called her a fat bitch who made him take care of the children. He even added that none of their girls ever really liked their mother.
He really knows how to sweet talk her. I mean, how could you resist?
For real.
And somehow this all worked because between January and April 2006, Matt would call Vanessa on either his cell or work phone 1 to 2 times per day. He kicked it up a notch when, in the beginning of March, Matt asked Vanessa if she wanted to come over for their counseling sessions. They then had sex in the family home only weeks before Kari died. Matt went from clasping her hands in prayer to kissing her to leading her into his bedroom. Despite Vanessa's guilt, their romantic relationship didn't end. It was after their first time together that Matt said to Vanessa that if they fell in love, he would find a way out. Might one possible way out of this supposed loveless marriage have been divorce? No, of course not. That was never an option for Baptist pastor Matt Baker. He couldn't risk his religious reputation because reconciliation with one's spouse is always the goal. Instead, only a month after they had begun their affair, Matt started running possible murder plots by Vanessa. He threw out ideas like engineering a drive by shooting, messing with the brakes in Kari's car, or hanging Kari and staging it as a suicide. It was this last idea that he had latched onto since he had claimed in emails to Vanessa that Kari had previously made attempts on her own life. Apparently, Matt even attempted to buy Rohypnol, which you don't need us to tell you is the drug of choice for rapists, to get Kari into a more suitable state. I get that Vanessa had recently gone through a divorce and was probably suffering some self esteem issues, so I can see that she was flattered instead of being repulsed by Matt's advances. But when he starts talking about different ways he could kill his wife, that is when the affair should have ended.
It's not as if it seemed like he was joking around. But that never happened, and eventually, Matt found a plan he thought was foolproof. He would drug Carrie's drink and plant a suicide note near her body. After Matt told Vanessa he would type the note to get around it not being in Carrie's handwriting, Vanessa, really not doing herself any favors in the likability department, replied, "You can't type a suicide note." However, Matt dismissed her objection by saying that Carrie typed all her documents. Besides, no one would be looking too closely at the way it was written.
He was just so sure of himself.
That he was. He thought he had covered all of his bases. The anniversary of Cassidy's death was coming up, and everyone knew how devastated Carrie was. Why would anyone doubt that she had taken her own life? 2 weeks before the staged suicide, Matt blended medication into a milkshake for Carrie. Carrie, though, wouldn't drink the drug beverage because of its lead like taste. An email that Matt sent to Carrie's work account the day after this failed attempt was later found that expressed his plan to improve his next milkshake by adding more chocolate
What a peach. Also, why would he email this to her?
so that she would feel obligated to drink the next one, I guess.
Maybe it's odd though.
Definitely. For some reason, Matt chose to forego death by milkshake in favor of something a bit kinkier. On the morning of Friday, April 7th, the day before Carrie was discovered, Vanessa was well aware of Matt's plan to kill Carrie during their date night just hours later.
How moral of her to know and do nothing.
Uh-huh. The next morning, Vanessa's mother, who was a member of Matt's congregation, a group through which news spread like wildfire, woke up her daughter to give her the shocking news, at least everyone else, that Carrie had been found dead. When Vanessa and her parents traveled to the Doolands to offer their sympathy that same day, Matt stayed close behind them as they left and winked at Vanessa while she and her family drove off.
He's like a smug, overconfident teenager.
His cockiness is unreal.
Undeterred by his creepy wink, when Kenzie and Grace were at school the following Wednesday, Vanessa once again came over to the Baker home. Matt took her into the living room and recounted how he had murdered Carrie. He told Vanessa how he had opened some sexual stimulants, poured out their contents, then refilled the capsules with crushed Ambien, which he then offered to Carrie. Carrie didn't think there was anything suspicious about taking the sexual stimulants. It was their date night after all. In reality, Matt took the over the counter stimulants himself, then led Carrie into their bedroom. Once the Ambien began to take effect, he proceeded to handcuff her to the bed and continue foreplay until she nodded off.
As Carrie snored in her drug induced sleep, Matt leaned down to place a kiss on her forehead and told her to hug or kiss Cassidy for him.
That's diabolical.
I wonder if he rationalized it in part by thinking that killing Carrie was in her best interest, like that it would be better for her to be dead so that she could be with her daughter again.
She has two other daughters.
I know that. In reality, the only person Matt was acting on behalf of was himself. He grabbed a pillow and shoved it over Carrie's face. Carrie, still alive, did what she could in her incapacitated state to move her head around, shaking it back and forth a couple of times. But with the Ambien in her system and the handcuffs on her wrists, Matt was able to overpower her. Believing his wife to be dead, Matt took the pillow from her face. But once he did, Carrie's eyes flew open and she desperately gasped for air. She was only able to draw in a single breath before Matt had the pillow back over her face. On his second attempt, Matt took care to ensure her nose and mouth were completely blocked by his hand and the pillow. He pressed down into his wife's face as her body shut down. Once he was convinced Kari was really dead, he took the handcuffs off her body and used the home computer to write the note. He then pressed Kari's hand into the printed sheet of paper to ensure her fingerprints would be found on her supposed last words before putting the note and the almost empty container of sleeping pills on the bedside table to finish staging the scene.
Matt proceeded to drive away to rent a movie and get gas to give himself an alibi, locking his and Carrie's bedroom door before he left their daughters, aged 5 and 9 at the time, in their bedrooms, completely oblivious to their father having murdered their mother.
Just like with Michael Tabb, it's horrific to think about them leaving their children in the house with their mother's dead body.
I mean, what if one of them woke up and went looking for their mom? Obviously, he didn't think or care.
His kids never really seemed to be his priority.
As we all know, Matt's plan initially worked, and no one was the wiser about what exactly had transpired. However, only days after killing his wife, Matt decided to divulge the details to Vanessa. After confessing, he said, "I never want to talk about it again." Well, he may not have gone into the specifics again. He certainly had no problem referencing the murder when it suited him, because when Vanessa tried to end their relationship in the months after Carrie's death, Matt explicitly said, "I killed my wife for you." As a mark to his immaturity and another likely threat, Matt gave Vanessa an MP3 of the All American Rejects' Dirty Little Secret. And get ready to never be able to listen to it again, because Matt said that he resonated with the lyrics. So I really want to sing it, but I can't sing. So I will try very hard just to say them. "I'll keep you my dirty little secret. Don't tell anyone, or you'll be just another regret." He spelled out to Vanessa that she would become his next regret if she ever spoke about what he had revealed to her. When she gave him an ultimatum telling him to turn himself in or she'd do it for him, Matt said in a scary sing song way, "You better not do that."
His threats seemed to have done the trick. They had weight behind them. If Matt had killed one romantic partner, he would surely have no issue killing another, even though he promised that he wouldn't do that to Vanessa.
Because, I mean, he always tells the truth.
And his loyalty never wanes. But even if she did take the risk of coming forward, Vanessa thought his respected position as religious leader would ensure that she wouldn't be believed.
Which is understandable. I mean, how many women did he sexually assault prior to being a pastor? And no one believed the women.
It's a good point. So, Vanessa lied about the affair and her knowledge of the murder to save herself from Matt and prison. But she did at least break up with Matt in July 2006, only months after the murder, and never spoke to him again. Although Vanessa was the one giving prosecutors all of this information, evidence like the email about Matt adding more chocolate to the next drugged milkshake he made for Kari gave credence to her claims. And the prosecution prepared to go to trial with her as one of their key witnesses. Interestingly, or at least I thought so, during voir dire, the prosecution used the questions Gregory Garrison, the attorney who prosecuted Mike Tyson for rape, wrote about in his book, Heavy Justice, that he used to avoid the boxer's acquittal because of his celebrity. The prosecutors in Matt's case wanted to make sure that the jurors would not judge Matt differently because of his history as a pastor at numerous Baptist churches throughout Texas.
Having selected their jurors over the course of a day, the trial began at the McLennan County Courthouse on January 13th, 2010. After witnesses close to Kari spoke about how she was looking forward to the possible new teaching position she interviewed for the day before she died, the prosecution had to address the many mistakes made when Kari's death was assumed to be a suicide. They told the jury that the two empty wine cooler bottles on the bedside table in the couple's bedroom and the home computer and printer weren't taken on the night she died. This turned out to be a fatal error because when Matt was told to turn over his home computer and printer for the wrongful death lawsuit, he said that he had thrown them both away after they quit working. If the home computer had been searched to find a copy of the note, investigators could have learned when it had been written. Prosecution also had the pathologist who had conducted Kari's autopsy testify as to why the months that had elapsed since Kari's death and the lack of blood meant that he couldn't state a cause of death.
Having gotten the problematic evidence out of the way, it was time to discuss what Matt's internet activity at the Waco Center for Youth had turned up. Unlike with the laptop given to him by the church for which he worked, Crossroads Baptist Church, whose hard drive had spilled all of Matt's secrets, his work computer at the Waco Center for Youth couldn't be searched because the one sitting on his desk wasn't his. It was just the one he had been using since his had apparently disappeared in the middle of June, right around the time investigators began looking for evidence. It turned out that the one investigators discovered on Matt's desk was from the office beside Matt's. The label on Matt's computer had simply been taken off and reattached to the one Matt started using after he took it from the neighboring office. His actual computer couldn't be located. Even with Matt claiming he had no idea where his computer was and assuring everyone that there was nothing on it he wanted to hide, the IT department managed to unearth their chaplain search history by accessing the center's server. In response to the incriminating searches he had conducted the months prior to Kari's death on overdose by sleeping pills, Matt said he had looked up their effects because Kari's periodic difficulty waking up in the morning made him concerned that she might be taking enough to accidentally overdose. As for why he didn't go to her doctor if he was that worried, Matt then responded that he believed Kari could manage it on her own, which isn't contradictory at all.
As for the websites he visited where he could buy drugs like Ambien without a prescription, Matt flat out denied ever trying to make these purchases. The prosecution's computer expert demonstrated that most of the pharmaceutical websites he went to while at work weren't informational. The owner of one such international site was a man from Spain named Mark Henry who traveled to the US on his own dime expressly for the purpose of explaining how his business worked. He told the court how his website will only appear in the search results if someone is using words that signify their intent to purchase prescriptions. Searches like Ambien or overdose by sleeping pills wouldn't pull them up, but searches like Ambien without prescription or buy Ambien would because of it being a point of sale website. Mark Henry outlined the process of putting items in the online shopping cart and mentioned that, like Matt, many customers don't go through with the order once they read the message saying that the shipment via the U.S. Postal Service will arrive in 2 weeks, preferring to use websites that use private delivery services like FedEx. Still, even though he hadn't completed the order, only weeks before Kari was found dead with Ambien in her system, Matt had put a generic form of the drug in his shopping cart on Mark Henry's site, showing his intent was to buy the medication, not to learn more about it.
On the third day of the trial, the prosecution called Kari's mother to the stand. Linda recounted to the court how, after her daughter's death, she had asked Matt about the crushed pills Kari had told her grief counselor about discovering in her husband's briefcase in the days leading up to her murder. After the grief counselor relayed this information to Linda and she went to Matt, he gave Linda the story that they had ended up in there when kids from the Waco Center for Youth had spit out their medication and shoved it into his briefcase to avoid taking it. He even claimed to have reported their behavior to the center security. Unsurprisingly, there was no record of this report.
It's just one lie after another.
I mean, why stop now? Matt later said that these pills had nothing to do with the disobedient children at the Waco Center for Youth. Perhaps realizing how convoluted that first narrative sounded, he told 48 Hours that the crushed pills in his possession were Kari's. He claimed that Kari had somehow gotten a bottle of pills and said she had found them in his briefcase. This was news to Matt since he had never seen them before. Apparently, after Matt suggested having the crushed medication tested, Kari dumped them down the sink.
Then, on day 4 of the trial, it was time for the jury to hear from 27-year-old Vanessa Bowles. Used to speaking in front of an audience as a 6th grade teacher,
Clearly, Matt had a type.
she explained how her affair with Pastor Matt Baker had begun. She confessed to having previously lied to the Hewitt Police Department and investigator Abden Rodriguez. She also admitted to leaving some of the details out of her grand jury testimony. After disclosing her prior misdeeds, Vanessa told the true version of events, the one that showed neither her nor Matt in the best light. She confessed to having known when Matt planned to murder Kari and recounted just how Matt had carried it out. She provided all the specifics Matt had given her, how he had given Kari a supposed sexual stimulant that actually contained crushed Ambien, secured his incapacitated wife to their bed with handcuffs, kissed her forehead and told her to hug and kiss Cassidy for him, then smothered his wife with a pillow, not once, but twice, until she was finally dead. As for how he squared murder with his faith, the pastor told Vanessa that God would be able to forgive him. I'm not religious, but I think some things are unforgivable.
You know I agree. Vanessa's knowledge of the murder both before and after it happened, and her prior falsehoods, certainly made her unsympathetic. But she also acknowledged that her testimony would likely spell the end of her teaching career, so she had no reason to lie now. Matt, shockingly, claimed she had, in fact, made everything up because he ended their relationship. He really is such a catch.
So much so.
The prosecutors had prepared for Matt taking the stand in his defense by collecting snippets from his interviews for 48 Hours in 2020 and from his testimony in the wrongful death suit. They had also gathered a bed, shirt, and fireman's dummy that was Kari's approximate weight for him to show how he had managed to dress Kari while speaking to the 911 dispatcher. Because although the phone was cordless and he could have theoretically held it between his head and shoulder during the 4-minute conversation, Matt said that he had gotten Kari into a shirt and underwear, then had moved her to the floor by sliding his hands beneath her shoulders and pulling her off the bed to administer CPR, all in less than a minute and a half. While Matt has always maintained that he discovered Kari naked, prosecutors believe she died in her t-shirt and underwear, which would make more sense than this incredible dressing feat.
I mean, what was the point of the lie that she was naked?
In my opinion, either to make himself sound like a devoted husband in dressing her to protect her modesty, or in case he needed to tell a version of the truth in recounting their date night.
I can see that. And I just have to say, I love a reenactment because you know that the freaking criminal doesn't think about, that they're actually going to try that. Let's use a dummy. Let's dress it. Let's see how we can do that. I just love that. I love that for him.
Yeah, me too.
Ultimately, they never got to see Matt fail this test, though, because the defense made the right call in not having Matt testify, knowing that his contradictory statements would be used by the prosecutors to shine a light through the gaping holes in his story. It would have given the prosecutors a chance to bring up Matt's confusion over whether Kari was awake or asleep when he left that night. He had first said that they had talked and he had given her a kiss on the forehead before heading out. But 2 months after that statement, he then claimed she had gone to sleep before he went for gas and a movie. Or the prosecution might have asked Matt when he first thought Kari was dead, because even though he told the 911 dispatcher that she had taken her own life, he later stated that he had only learned of her suicide after a police officer handed him the note. When asked about the discrepancy previously, Matt had backtracked by saying he had only glanced at the note when he grabbed the phone, so he didn't know for sure while speaking to the operator.
Instead of opening Matt up to uncomfortable questions, his defense presented the many emails Kari had written that detailed her grief over Cassidy's death. They also had a DNA expert state that the suicide note clearly had Kari's DNA on it. However, that was always going to be a Hail Mary because, like the Unisom bottle, the note had been touched by numerous people not wearing gloves when authorities first assumed that Kari had died by suicide. So it was hardly a smoking gun that only pointed at her. As for other DNA evidence that could have proven either suicide or homicide, the murder weapon could never be identified because the delayed autopsy also meant that Carrie's DNA couldn't be retrieved to be tested against any possible contenders. After a week, the trial ended. It took around 7.5 hours of deliberation and a single vote before the jury came back to find 38-year-old Matt Baker guilty of first-degree murder on January 20th, 2010, nearly 4 years after he had killed Kari.
When it came to his sentencing, the prosecution gave the testimony of several women towards which Matt had made unwanted sexual advances, including that of one woman who had gone to the police about Matt trying to sexually assault her when she came to see the family in the hospital while Cassidy was receiving treatment. Super classy.
That's Matt, all right.
The prosecution said they knew of at least 13 women that Matt had harassed and or assaulted in the 15-year period between 1991 and 2006. These instances included Matt trying to sexually assault one woman in January 1992 in Kerrville, whom he later pursued again over the phone 12 years later in July 2004. He came on to another woman in Waco in July 1994, having come onto a child that same month. He then kissed, again, more accurately, assaulted a different child only the month after. His spree of sexual advances in Waco continued when he approached two other women in 1996. He's so gross.
That sums it up.
On top of all this, he came on to 6 more women, which included 2 other children and 2 of his wife's cousins between September 1995 and April 2006. The prosecution also pointed to the time Matt spent on pornographic websites, as well as sites aimed at spouses wanting to cheat on their partners, on the laptop given to him by the church for which he worked, Crossroads Baptist Church, as well as on his other work computer at the Waco Center for Youth. He must have thought he was above ever getting caught for any of his bad behavior. There was no recourse for his many sexual assaults, and then he thought looking at porn and cheating sites was fine on 2 separate work computers?
And maybe if he hadn't committed murder, he would have been right. In contrast, his defense relied on the testimony of several character witnesses, such as those who had known him when he was younger. Funnily enough, some of these witnesses seemed to have more positive things to say about his family than him. Disturbingly, though, some of his congregants demonstrated their blind devotion to their pastor. Jean Lerman, who belonged to the Riesel Baptist Church at which Matt had been a pastor years before, said she doubted most of the charges brought against him, adding, "I truly felt that he is a man of God." Another woman, alarmingly and disgustingly, said that a man could kill the mother of his children and remain a good father. All I have to ask is, what world are you living in, lady?
Truly, how do you believe that? And let's pretend she's some old lady and she has a daughter and and she has grandkids and her son-in-law kills her daughter. Would she still feel the same freaking way? I mean, evil much?
Well, if he's a pastor, it seems like it. Matt's other lawyer, besides Guy James Gray, Harold Danford, chose to defend Matt by reminding the jury that he was a good neighbor, father, and Baptist pastor. He pointed to these attributes and his religious activities, like youth mission trips, as if they canceled out what he called some things he's not proud of. The prosecution countered this by highlighting what Matt had done: murdered his wife, then told his daughters that she had killed herself and that he was the innocent party being hounded by an unfair justice system.
Must just be me, but being a good neighbor and participating in youth mission trips doesn't outweigh murdering your wife and playing the victim.
Yeah, it's not about quantity. I don't care that he only murdered one person and went on numerous mission trips. That doesn't seem like a mitigating factor.
True.
The Waco jury didn't buy this flimsy defense either. The day after finding him guilty, they came back after nearly 2 hours and sentenced Matt to 65 years, instead of the probation he applied for or the maximum term of life in prison. He won't become eligible for parole until 2042, after he has served at least half of his 65 years. Also, a short side note, I was confused as to how Matt could only face probation after being convicted of first degree murder, but apparently that was allowed at the time because he had no prior felony convictions.
I mean, I wonder and hope if that is just a Texas thing because he hadn't robbed a liquor store and his first felony was murdering his wife. Probation was an option. I mean, mind blown.
I know, I honestly thought I'd read the source wrong when it mentioned probation.
I mean, I feel like that's an only in Texas kind of thing, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Because probation just doesn't equate to the devastation Matt caused, Linda Doolin said in the victim impact statement she gave at his sentencing, "You took her from us, Matt. You discarded her like she was yesterday's trash. And you left so many other victims. What you did was horrific, and I believe you are capable of much more evil." When he was taken from the courtroom, Matt told his mother, his staunch defender, that he loved her and asked her to take care of his daughters. She was, fortunately, one of the few who believed in his innocence. After their client was sentenced, his lawyers stopped representing him. Guy James Gray had previously said Matt was only being tried due to lying about cheating with Vanessa. But after Matt confessed to having lied to his lawyer the months before the case went to trial, his attorney began to wonder what else Matt might not be telling him. His request to stop representing Matt before the trial was denied, so he did his job and maintained that reasonable doubt still existed.
Days after being sentenced, Matt appealed by arguing, among other points, ineffective counsel, insufficient evidence, and unfair trial conduct. The appeal stated that his defense should have objected to an alternate juror being in the room during deliberations. The Texas 10th Court of Appeals overruled his claim of having ineffective counsel because this alternate juror was ordered not to participate, which they didn't, so their presence didn't affect the verdict. They also found the evidence, including Vanessa's testimony, sufficient for a reasonable jury to convict him of murder. Regarding unfair trial conduct, Matt's appeal stated that by making comments to the prosecution, like suggesting they zoom in on pieces of evidence displayed on screen, the court was helping the prosecution make their argument, showing bias against Matt. However, because Matt's defense didn't object at the time, this last point was also overruled and his appeal was denied. Having lost at the state level, he decided to bring his perceived plight to a federal court. Luckily, this year, 2025, marks 15 years since Matt was sentenced, yet from his cell at Michael Unit Men's Prison in Anderson County, Texas, he still claims that Kari died by suicide.
With Matt convicted of Kari's murder, Kari's parents dropped the wrongful death lawsuit. However, in the aftermath of the trial, Vanessa's statement to the court that Matt had gone to where Cassidy was buried to see if they messed with Cassidy's grave after finding out Kari's body would be exhumed kept ringing in their ears. They began to wonder if 16-month-old Cassidy's death in 1999 was all that it seemed. Bill Johnston said he would have authorities re-examine her death following treatment for her brain tumor. He planned to have them look into the circumstances, like if the baby monitor had been taken from her room so she couldn't be heard. As far as we could find, there hasn't been an investigation or anyone else besides some Reddit users buying into the theory that Matt killed Cassidy. At Matt's sentencing, Linda amazingly added that she and her family chose to forgive Matt for his two daughters' sake. And that was perhaps the only option they had because Matt and his family had told the girls that Jim and Linda were the reason their innocent father was being taken away from them. The whole family is awful.
Which I'm not surprised by.
Kenzie and Grace had been living with Matt's parents since Matt was arrested and wanted to remain there. Worried about their well being, the Doolins fought for custody, and in 2011, after 8 hours of deliberation, a jury ruled in their favor and didn't name Matt as possessory conservator, which would have entitled him to court ordered visitations.
When Kenzie and Grace learned that they would have to leave Matt's parents, Barbara and Oscar Baker, whom they'd been living with since 2009, and move from Kerrville to Linda and Jim Doolin's house near Waco, the 10 and 15-year-old girls began crying. Linda had desperately wanted the girls to know that their mother hadn't taken her own life. Sadly, Kenzie testified in the 9-day custody trial that she knew her mom died from an accidental overdose and prayed that her dad would be released.
His family brainwashed those poor girls. I so feel for the anguish her parents must have gone through.
As if they hadn't been traumatized enough. This trial also featured testimony from 2 women who alleged that Oscar, Matt's father, had molested them years earlier when they were in foster care with the Bakers. He has denied these claims, but considering how his son turned out, it's less than shocking. The Doolins had argued that Matt and his family were feeding the girls lies that led them to hate Linda and Jim for pursuing their father. They categorized this as a form of child abuse. The Bakers, on the other hand, had said the girls were upset because of Kari's parents' attempts to prove Matt was a murderer. Fortunately, after living with the Doolins for a few years, the girls seemed to have healed the relationship with their maternal grandparents before it was too late, as their grandfather Jim died at the age of 63 in Waco on November 21st, 2014.
And although we found more specific information about them, all we're going to say about Kenzie and Grace is that they both graduated from college and seem to be doing well. They didn't ask for the notoriety that came from their dad murdering their mom, and Grace has spoken out about documentaries that haven't consulted the family. So we'll leave it at that. The last thing we'll say about Kari's family is that her brother Adam honored Kari by making his late sister's name his daughter's middle name.
Okay, let's talk about the elephant or bull in the room. I know, sorry.
That's great.
Vanessa. First, I do not think that Matt would have been convicted if it hadn't been for her, and I could buy that she was scared of him. But I don't love the fact that she knew that he was going to kill Kari beforehand and didn't tell anyone. She could have not thought he was serious, although knowing that Matt had already given Kari a drugged milkshake pokes holes in that argument. Let's say she was afraid, though, and that's why she didn't say anything and waited to break up with him until months after the murder. All right, fair enough. However, she broke up with him in 2006 and didn't come clean about the affair or Matt's confession until 2009. She did admit that she hadn't wanted to go to prison for her role and that she had thought she wouldn't be believed once Pastor Matt Baker had a say, and I can see that. I also agree with the description of Matt she gave at trial when she said, "He was a complete and still is a manipulative liar who took me at my vulnerable state." She was young, recently divorced, and a newly single mom. That's a lot. Add onto it a man who refused to hear the word no, and I agree she was preyed on. She was also right about what would happen to her. She was fired, but no charges were brought against her. All that to say, I'm glad she wasn't prosecuted, but I still feel a bit conflicted. What do you think?
I've made several comments throughout the episode, but I have opinions. First, I agree with you that Matt wouldn't have been convicted without her testimony. And I also think she was vulnerable and he definitely preyed upon her. And when it was just an affair and she didn't know his intent to kill Carrie, fine, get your groove back. That is where my understanding ends. I don't buy that maybe she didn't think he would go through with it. She listened to him brainstorm different ways to kill his wife. She even told him that no one types a suicide note. I mean, maybe the police wouldn't have believed her if she had gone to them about his murder plot. He probably would have been able to talk his way out of it. Could she not have gone to Carrie directly? I know that's asking a lot, but Carrie had suspicions about Matt. Was he really such a catch that she did nothing? Then, when he actually does kill Carrie, why is her reaction not to immediately break up with him, go to the police, and find a job in another town? I don't think she should have been prosecuted. Maybe living with her inaction is punishment enough.
I think so, and I don't know. Maybe she didn't go to Carrie or the police because she really was scared. It doesn't feel great, especially like you mentioned the suicide note comment. That's what I keep coming back to. But I could believe the whole fear argument.
I guess a little bit, but I mean, it's not like he's like a serial killer who has murdered all these women, violently with knives and guns, and she's really scared. He's like coming up with these like movie type ways to kill his wife. I mean, it doesn't seem like he's going to plot out and, he's going to, I don't know, observe her from the street and then come in and murder her in her sleep. I guess she was probably scared, but I think if maybe she thought past that a little bit, what was he really going to do? But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I kind of think she was more scared of prison than Matt, which I can understand.
I guess, yeah.
Next week, we'll be continuing our series on religious leaders who kill family members when we discuss the case of Tracy Burleson.
All the sources we used for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case or theme for us to discuss, feel free to email us at terrifyingthetypicalpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at Terrifying the Typical Podcast on Instagram and at Terrifying the Typical Pod on TikTok. Leave us a comment below to let us know what you thought of the case. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you next week.